TYT Sports, Ben and JR with you. We are talking about LeBron James' return to the Cleveland Cavaliers, leaving the Miami Heat. We just read a tweet in the last segment. We'll read it again. Here's Mickey Arison's tweet, the owner of the Heat. Shocked and disappointed in today's news. However, I will never forget what LeBron brought us for 4 years. Thanks for the memories, you coward, LeBron, King James. Classy Mickey Arison, right? Obviously. In stark contrast to Dan Gilbert's sort of petulant whining 4 years ago. But I understood that a little more than you did. I'm not saying I'm right. I just, I thought the manner in which LeBron handled that was so obnoxious, easily forgivable as it turned out, but so obnoxious that your reaction in the immediate aftermath could be forgiven. Somebody, almost like you say things during a fight that you don't mean. It is weird that he left the letter up for 4 years, though. I mean, that's it. Yeah. Like, if you did that, I don't know what day it was when LeBron left. It was a Tuesday. By Friday, I would have been like, take that letter down. I'm not proud of that. It's not my best moment.
Or even a response letter. Be like, emotions were high. I did this, this, and that. And I didn't actually, the so-called LeBron, he's never going to win a championship before Cleveland wins. When all these ridiculous things that he said that everyone laughed at. And also point out that he wrote it in Comic Sans, which actually was the least egregious part of it, in my opinion. Because everyone was like, oh, and he wrote the letter in Comic Sans. Who writes an angry letter in Comic Sans? And that was actually a funny point.
That is a good point, yeah.
I get it, but there should have been something. He should have said something. Instead, he only says behind closed doors. LeBron comes forward and apologizes for his mistakes he made, which, by the way, ESPN made that mistake too by broadcasting the decision constantly. And then they broadcast how much everyone hates him for them broadcasting the decision. Anyway, all I'm point is no one else gets to blame except for LeBron. And then behind closed doors, Dan Gilbert can say, oh, I apologize. I'm going to change what I said about you, or we've made amends. But up front, everyone else has to be forward and apologize.
That's what I mean. In the day that happened, I put most of the blame on LeBron because he's the one who acted first. In hindsight, the person who acted worse is Dan Gilbert. Like, I agree with you. So if you had the sort of foresight to see that on day one, that's impressive. I didn't. I reacted, first of all, I don't give a shit about the Cavaliers. It's weird. But I reacted emotionally, I suppose, that day too, as a lot of people did. So I was sympathetic to that. I'm always sympathetic to people's emotional reactions. But in hindsight, Gilbert's letter was this petulant, horrible thing. And what LeBron ultimately did was executed poorly, but do what, of course, no one would deny he has the right to do, which is choose where he wants to go play. A couple things I want to talk. First, we want to talk about the Heat, but let's talk about this. So, J.A. Andande, formerly of the Washington Post, the LA Times, now with ESPN, this is how his piece today started off. And I read this morning before LeBron had agreed to return. If I could get a meeting of my own with LeBron James, Andande writes, I'd ask him how he could even consider compromising his values and stepping down from the moral high ground he ascended to during the playoffs by weighing an offer from Cleveland Cavaliers owner Dan Gilbert. LeBron, Andande continues, produced the sharpest and most noteworthy criticism of Clippers owner Donald Sterling after TMZ made Sterling's comments public, saying, this is LeBron's quote, "It's unacceptable in our league." So this made me angry too. Apparently I care a lot about what LeBron James does. Like, I don't think it is fair to criticize Gilbert's obnoxious petulance in that letter in any way with Sterling's reprehensible racism. And Andande does point out in this article, like, hey, it's not like Gilbert and Sterling are the same, but he sort of does make them seem the same right in his first two paragraphs.
Well, the reason he has to point out that they're not the same is because he understands that his piece made them seem about the same.
Right.
If you don't have to, you don't have to point out that they're not the same if you didn't just infer that they're the same.
That's a great point. I got to remember that when I'm writing. That's a great point. Like, if you're spending a lot of time pointing out what you didn't mean, maybe rewrite what you said.
You understand what it sounds like.
Right. So I don't see a similarity there. I don't see. I think that Andande is actually then putting the same sort of restrictions on James that people who wanted him to stay with Cleveland because he had some obligation to Cleveland. Now he has some obligation not to go back to Dan Gilbert. Like, and Andande, to be fair to Andande's full point, he says that Gilbert was one of the toughest owners during the last labor negotiations, that he was prepared to miss games because he wanted to break the back of the union. And I think that's true. Most of the small market teams wanted tougher rules so that they could compete with a league that is that in some days seems like it's turning into New York versus Chicago versus Los Angeles versus Miami, and there are no other teams. So, but to hold LeBron to that standard now seems like if the letter was directed to James, and so if James wants to forgive that and forget about the labor negotiations, well then he gets to do that too.
It's the difference between throwing your opinion out there and then assuming that he should do something, which again was my issue with. I wasn't upset that Cleveland is sad that LeBron left 4 years ago. Fine, you can be sad, but then to say you should have, this is what he should. Hey, it's free agents. He can do whatever he wants to do. I even said as distasteful as the decision was, you can do whatever you want to do it. But so when in coming back, you can't exactly. I agree with you. You can't be the same way in coming back, but you can't throw an opinion out there that because I just don't understand. I guess is the furthest I can go. I don't get how you can go back and play with this guy, play for this guy after the things he said and did, and what seemingly he is. Because I don't think he's like Sterling, but I do think he has a little bit of a I want to control my players type of power, which it's a touchy thing with professional sports, especially with black athletes.
Yeah. There's
this slave mentality, slave master mentality that some of these guys I think have. It's just the way it is. Now, I don't know if he's one of those guys. I never talked to Dan Gilbert, but all I can go off of is the things that he said and his actions, and they seem like he has a little bit of that going on.
Gilbert.
Now, I wouldn't understand that. Maybe LeBron knows him better. Obviously, he knows him better. So maybe that's something he doesn't see.
Yeah, and if LeBron says they met man to man, they talked it out. While you play for Dan Gilbert, you don't like. I imagine that some NBA players see the owner once or twice a year, and most good owners, the non-Dan Snyders of the world, hire football people to run football, basketball people to run basketball, baseball people to run baseball, and they sign the checks and live look at me, I'm the owner of a team, and they have a good life, but they're not, so like if it were a coach, I would have, by the way, so I would have a different try.
I just docked this up a France killer. Shots so bright, I got a tan.